This is the Vanguard interview series, and I'm your host, Gavin Miller Broomfield. Today, we're talking with candidates, activists, people on the vanguard of leftist political thought. And today we've just been joined by Hank Linderman, the Democratic nominee for the U.S. House of Representatives, running to represent Kentucky's 2nd District. How's it going today, Hank?
Well, like I say, that's always a dangerous question, at least in the year 2020.
Absolutely. That's couldn't be further from the truth. For viewers who aren't aware, maybe haven't heard of you or this race, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Maybe give some background on your career as a musician and some of the experiences that perhaps led you into this game of politics?
Okay. Sure. Yeah. I spent my life as a musician. My name's Hank, by the way. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. My family moved to Louisville. We had traveled all over the country for a number of years because my dad was a salesman. We wound up in Louisville when I was a junior in high school. And so Kentucky is where I started my career in music and put bands together, traveled all over the state, met and married my wife here. And maybe 38 years ago or so, moved to California with a band. And I ended up working for bands like America. They had a big hit called Horse with No Name. I used to work for Joni Mitchell, an iconic singer-songwriter and genius performer. She was wonderful. I worked for the band Chicago. I ended up working for the Eagles. I worked on their last record. I worked on Don Henley's last record. Most of my work was as a recording engineer, but I also performed and played music and co-wrote songs and this sort of thing. So I had this wonderful career. But I was always, with my wife, we were always coming back and forth between Kentucky and California because that's where our friends and family were. So we were always connected to Kentucky. And the first house we bought in the 80s was a house that we bought with my mom that we still have in Louisville. And the house we have now, which is at Falls of Rough, Kentucky, out in Grayson County, we've had this for about 15 years, and it's 3 doors from where my wife's family had a place in the 60s. So we have a lot of deep Kentucky roots, mostly through my wife, but also through my own family. And I had been involved with politics somewhat when I was in high school and even going to college, but mostly in high school. That was the time of the Vietnam War, and I protested against the war. But I have to say, I gave up on politics after Richard Nixon was pardoned. And I thought that was a massive, massive error. And in retrospect, that was a mistake. I should have stayed involved. Anyway, President Trump's election in 2016 alarmed me. And I didn't really understand all the pieces that were in place behind the scenes that allowed that to happen, that caused that to happen. In 2017, someone wagged their finger in my face, and got their finger in my face and said, "You need to run. You've been talking about it." And they proposed that I run in a purple district, which would have been Lexington. But I didn't feel right about that because a purple district already has people fighting the good fight. But in the 2nd district, no one had run in 2016. So it was a completely run down in the sense of having any kind of Democratic presence. It just didn't exist in 2016, at least at the federal level. However, Bernie Sanders had won the 2nd during the 2016 presidential primary. So that was very interesting to me. And I'm basically progressive and populist. So I ran in 2018. I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I was able to raise enough money to hire a former congressman to advise me, Mike Ward. He had served in the 3rd congressional district, the seat that John Yarmouth holds right now. And Mike Ward was instrumental in teaching me all the do's and don'ts and ins and outs. So I won the primary. We had a total of 4 of us. And I won the primary and then went on to run in the election. We got 80,000 votes, which is a heck of a lot better than 0. And I stayed involved even though I had lost the election in 2019 was not an election year for me. I stayed very involved. I was on the ground showing up at events, contributing, co-sponsoring events. And the victory that we had last year with getting Governor Beshear elected a Democrat was a very narrow victory, only 5,000 votes. So that says to me a lot of effort went, and I saw a lot of effort on the ground from people. Everyone was working their very hardest. So that was worth doing. It meant that when I filed again to run in 2020, because I had been so active, no one felt like running against me, which was great. And that's the way to run if you've got a choice. And so here I am, and COVID, of course, has changed all this. So I now do most of my campaigning online and through Zoom meetings. And
Right.
I go live on Facebook every day at 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central. And that, by the way, is the half hour before Governor Andy. So was that a short enough answer?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. Thank you for that little introduction. It sounds like you've had a really interesting life with a lot of, cool accomplishments. The music stuff is obviously really impressive. And you're running against now the incumbent Brett Guthrie, who has represented Kentucky's 2nd district since 2009. You mentioned that, instead of running in the purple district, you decided to run in the more red district, correct? And
that is correct.
So the 2nd district is obviously a pretty red district. What's your strategy exactly for kind of flipping that blue and, convincing people that instead of reelecting their incumbent representative, Brett Guthrie, it's time to change up their representation and maybe have some fresh ideas in there?
That's a really broad question. I guess what I want to say, first of all, is that Democrats need to recognize that they really haven't done the job. Neither party has really done the job in rural America.
Oh, yeah, couldn't agree more.
Pardon me?
I said I couldn't agree more. Yeah, both parties have really failed.
Neither party has done the job. But Democrats gave up in districts like the 2nd and the 1st and the 4th and the 5th in Kentucky. Gave up about 20 years ago. I think the last time they might have had a race, I think in 2006 that they were part of, but they really weren't committed to it. And anyway, you can't leave these districts behind. I'm sure the reason was, well, we don't feel like we can win right now. So we'll save our money and we'll work on places we can win. That makes sense for 2 years or 4 years or 6 years maybe, but it was way too long. By the time 2016 came around, Democrats weren't even in the discussion. And the 2nd, the 1st, the 4th, and the 5th here in Kentucky are matched by other rural districts across the nation that had been let go. So that is why Democrats were completely shocked that Donald Trump won the presidency. They had no idea. Now, I was back here and I recognized how much passion there was for Trump, and say whatever you like about him. He acknowledged working people. He acknowledged rural America. He saw them. The last significant Democrat, national Democrat, to come through the state of Kentucky while they were in office was President Bill Clinton in 1995. And before that, he wasn't in office, but Robert Kennedy came through in the 60s. Bernie Sanders, of course, traveled a bit through the state, but he made it to Bowling Green. He didn't really make it very, very deeply into rural America. Well, that's a big error. We have to get out and discuss what the needs are that aren't being met in rural America. And I want to say, if we divide the country into equal portions by 4, so we've got 25% of the population divided by 4, and one group is rural, one group is subrural, one is suburban, and one is urban. And you compare those states to their representation in the Senate, you find that urban districts or urban states have only 14% representation in the Senate, but the rural ones have 37%. Now, with that sort of leverage, you would think that we would already have rural broadband. You would think that working people would already being paid properly. You would think we would have rural hospitals staying open, and we might even have legalized cannabis. So all of those things say to you what has been going on. What Republicans did was they were able to get away with just focusing on social issues, God, guns, gays, and gynecology, which don't really cost anything. All they have to do is say, I'm pro-life, and that's kind of settled that question. They don't actually have to come up with policies that help working people and people who live in rural America. And Democrats, shame on them, abandoned. They abdicated their role in rural Kentucky. So Thomas Frank, do you know Thomas Frank? Do you know that name?
Indeed, yes.
So this is his recent book, The People. No.
Yeah, about the Kansas Populist Party, right?
Well, it's a history of populism.
Yeah.
Which begins in 1890. It was put together by Kansas farmers, and they actually got to be pretty successful. He has a simple definition for populism, and I agree with this, and I identify myself this way. Populism is social and political change that comes up from the grassroots, that comes from the ground up. It's a very simple way of saying it, that when the people want something and they're willing to work together to get it, that is populism to my mind. And Donald Trump is no populist, but he gets away with this crap because Democrats don't offer a credible alternative. And that's my strategy, if you can say that. I believe this is a bigger deal than just this district. I believe the Democratic Party and the Republican Party need to face what's going on in rural America. If they don't, we are going to continue the fracture as a nation. We're going to continue to kick the can down the road as far as climate change, as far as social justice, as far as all of these problems that we are facing will be, they'll be avoided for as long as possible. On the other hand, if we start to make a difference in rural America, it will make the lives of every American better. It may take pressure off the cost of housing in markets like New York City or San Francisco, where it's basically unaffordable to live. And just by putting broadband infrastructure in, we bring in the outside world to areas that are not served. Yes. So I think this is a very important district. By the way, it's 21 counties. Davis, Hardin, Warren, Bullitt, Nelson, Barron, Boyle, Meade, Mercer, Breckenridge, Grayson, Hart, Hancock, LaRue, Washington, Garrett, Jessamine, Greene, Edmondson, Butler, Spencer, and I've been to all of them. These are districts that are very aware of and concerned about problems in their county, but they're not necessarily aware of or concerned about what's going on a few counties away, and certainly not across the district. So my big thing I've been doing this year is connecting activists from each of those counties to each other. So I tell them winning the race is the final piece of the puzzle. Before then, there's lots of work to do. So I'm not giving you any chance to speak. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's great. No, like I said before, I really appreciate your time, and I'm really interested in this race. Kentucky is an interesting state, and especially interesting to me, and a little bit infuriating too, that you mentioned that the Democratic Party isn't really, they've kind of abandoned these races, especially in rural districts like the one you're running in. Well, meanwhile, you can't go on Facebook, without seeing 100 ads for Amy McGrath, who a lot of people would agree probably doesn't have a great chance of winning that race. It seems like they've really put all their money and, fundraising into this really high profile race against Mitch, but they're not giving any resources to your race.
I don't have enough resources yet exactly. However, I have a volunteer campaign.
Yeah.
So for example, the guy who is doing my website and does the videos and is working every day to help the campaign, he's doing it as a volunteer. He's the bass player for the band America, the Grammy-winning band America. And his name's Rich Campbell, and he's a tremendous help. Rich, at one point I was saying, Rich, I feel like we're asking you to do too much, and I don't want to burn you out. And he said, Hank, this is the best part of my day. The band isn't on the road. He said, if I weren't doing this, I'd be throwing my shoes at the TV 3-4 times a day. So I have folks like that who are volunteering. We're also very cautious with our resources. We spent some money on video equipment. So as you can see, I've got, I have a little bit of a video studio, and I go live on Facebook every day. We've got, I've got sound effects I can play quickly.
Oh, nice.
Whenever we said Trump, I would play the Wilhelm scream. Are you familiar with the?
Yeah, no, I'm actually a big movie buff, so I'm very familiar with that.
Well, whenever I would say Trump, I can do that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually a film major. No, that's my whole passion. So that's funny.
Oh, well, excellent. Yeah, well, this is the way forward. Rather than paying people to do videos, we decided let's get some gear and do it ourselves. So
absolutely.
Things.
The whole Joe Biden approach of just campaigning out of your house with a little studio. I mean, that's probably the most effective way to do it in these times.
I think it is. I am getting invited to go do things, but then you show up and you have to wear a mask, and not many people are showing up at events. You can't really have the kind of events. Although the people who show up are activists, and it's still important to show up. I tell people if you're frustrated and you want to be involved, the easiest thing to do is write a check. That's the easiest
Yep.
thing. If you write a check for $50, there's nothing easier. However long it took you to earn $50, excuse me, that's a lot less effort than joining the local party and getting involved. Now, by the way, I want to encourage younger people now, please start to get involved with these parties, with the Democratic Party, with the county parties. Show up at meetings, get involved. First of all, when you get out into the rural districts, you'll be a rarity. There's not going to be a lot of you there, so you get treated really well. And the Democratic Party in Kentucky is going to be reorganizing next year. Next year will be a big reorg year. And the party has gotten the message that they need to pay attention to certain communities. And so they've started 2 new advisory groups. One of them is the Black Caucus. You would think there would have already been a Black Caucus, and maybe there was, maybe it wasn't called that. But they've also started the Rural Council. These groups became real about 5 weeks ago. I was invited to be part of it about 2.5 months ago of the Rural Council. And 2.5 weeks ago, I was elected chair. So I'm the chair now for the Rural Council advising the Kentucky Democratic Party. And we are going to be focusing on organizing these rural districts that have been let go. And it'll take time to build those up, but we need help. We need committed people to be involved, and it doesn't take that many people. There's a story I saw recently that said when 3.5% of the population gets involved to try and bring forth change, they are always successful around the world and through history. So one of the issues that's going on right now, the Republican Party is rather unified around President Trump. They might be unified in fear, but they are unified and they're going to stick with him until the very, very end. Democratic Party is very divided. And it's divided between the groups that I call the establishment group and the progressives. Yeah. For example, I supported Bernie Sanders, and in 2019, throughout early 2020, I was contributing to him in a year when I wasn't earning very much money because I was so committed to doing politics. He was my first choice. Joe Biden was not my second choice. So, but he is now the nominee, and I do think it's important to defeat Donald Trump. But one description I saw today was that Trump is not the rot in the system. He's the stench of the system, but he is not the real problem.
Yep.
And when Donald Trump is gone, we've got real problems to face. So I'm personally going to be fighting for Joe Biden to reconsider things like Medicare for all. And by the way, when I talk about healthcare, sorry about that. When I talk about healthcare, I talk about things in terms of goals. So, for example, healthcare that costs less, a lot less. I think 40% is possible. That's easier to use, so that when someone's sick, you don't have to be arguing you don't have to be on the phone on hold waiting to talk to an insurance company while your loved one is sick. That honestly covers all of us. We are all already covered right now, only 90% properly, or sort of semi-properly. But the people that aren't covered, we still end up paying for them. So honestly covering people. And we also want better results, meaning we live longer, we have lower rates of serious disease, lower rates of infant mortality. Now, if a conservative idea gets us closer to those goals, if it's found to be the best solution, I don't care. My ideology is important to me, but it's only a guide.
Yeah.
My ideology is a guide. It is not my goal. And one of the things I see with ideology all over the spectrum is that no, this is the way it always is. We must always cut taxes, which is what Republicans seem to say. There's always only one answer, and that's all I'm capable of. I don't see it that way at all. When you work collaboratively, you come up with answers that work better. There's a great story that I heard about high-tension power lines in Alaska. And there are, to bring power to areas of Alaska that are very distant, very remote, they need hundreds of miles of high-tension wires that travel through wilderness. And in the winter, when it snows, that collects on the wires, turns into ice. Then if you get enough weight, a lot of times the wires get pulled down. They've got to send out a helicopter crew to repair it. It's expensive, time-consuming, and dangerous. So it was frustrating the company that was responsible for doing this. They called everybody together, including the engineers, the CEOs, the helicopter pilots, the guys who were working on the lines, and said, what do we do? And after a few rounds, finally, one of the guys who works on the lines gets recognized, and he says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to bait every other pole with something that bears like. And what'll happen is the bears will climb up and they will shake the pole, and it'll shake so much that it'll shake the ice off, and that'll be great. Well, the whole room laughed at it. But a helicopter pilot said, no, hang on. A bear might not, it's a little too unpredictable, but what if we took our helicopters and flew at a low altitude along the 100 or 200 miles?
Yeah.
The downdraft would shake this. That is now what they do. That idea would not have come if for the guy saying we got to use bears to shake the trees. I told one person this story, and he said, well, Trump is the bear. Trump is a little bit the bear. He's shaking things, but he's causing other damage. Anyway, that is collaboration. That is how we work together. But we cannot have true collaboration with congresspeople that are owned by their donors. And Brett Guthrie is owned by his contributors. 82% of his money, this, by the way, comes from opensecrets.org, comes from corporate PACs or corporate-related contributors. And Brett gives a good meeting, apparently. He looks in your eyes and smiles and says all kinds of nice things, and you think he understands you, but he always votes the way his contributors want him to do. He's also gotten wealthy while he's been in office. Again, this is according to Open Secrets and also a website called Sludge. When Brett entered Congress, he had a net worth of below $422,000, which was below average for Congress people. In 2017, I believe, again, according to these sources, he was up at around 7.4 million. We think now, based on what we're seeing, it may be as high as $11 million. And if that is true, he's accumulating personal wealth faster than Mitch McConnell.
Wow.
He's 25% owner in a business called Trace Tool and Die. His brother's another 25%. His father is 25%. They got a $4.4 million PPP loan very recently. Brett announced that to the Bowling Green Daily News late one Friday afternoon, the Friday of the 4th of July weekend. So that's a good time to bury things. That, we believe, could be the largest PPP loan given to a company owned by a government official. Now, this is corruption. Might be legal. Probably is legal.
Yeah.
But it's corruption.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing we have to stop. That is unfair.
Agreed. And that kind of, brings to mind something you were speaking about earlier, which is kind of the divide in the Democratic Party. And to someone like me, that is the divide in the party. Those who are willing to call out corruption and to not take part in it, people like yourself. And then the other half of the party, which is, more than happy to take part in corruption and to serve the interests of their donors, just like those Republicans, just like your opponent. So, I think it's a little bit unfair maybe to characterize those are the people that are very unhappy with the direction the party's going in as not wanting to play on the same team or whatever, when in reality it's a deep and fundamental disagreement with the nature of politics and how it should function in this country, serving the people versus serving the powerful, the elite moneyed interests, is a quite foundational difference in my opinion. So that's why someone like me is just so disgusted with the Democratic Party's status quo and their leadership's continual refusal to acknowledge the problems of corruption, like we've talked about, acknowledge these inhibitors on progress that are literally costing people's lives. We see with climate change now is another huge one. And yes, they are better than the Republicans. And I'm glad that you're running, of course, in Kentucky. That's why I invited you on, because I think that you're breaking these norms. You're kind of calling out a lot of these things which other Democratic candidates are reticent to do, especially in rural and red states like Kentucky, because they're afraid of, just being laughed off the stage by the media or by their constituents or whatever. I wanted to ask you, what has been the response from constituents, from voters in your district to your ideas? You sense a lot of agreement on a lot of these causes. I remember you said that the Democrats aren't really even trying in your district. They're not really offering these rural communities necessarily anything of value, but your platform is littered with great ideas, great policy prescription for these very peoples, farmers in particular. So I just wanted to give you a opportunity to, lay out some of your platform ideas. I'll pull up your page on screen too for anyone that's watching.
Actually, I can show you if you want. I can show you just a splash of the Contract for Rural and Working America, which is at my website. The website is hank4ky.com. And there's the splash that's what it looks like when you get to that page. And here's a bit of the headlines. These are the things that I talk about all the time. Now, I'm going to point something out to you. When I talk about these things, we're back to talking about goals. I think it's important to talk about policy last. Policy is a trap. As soon as we say we're going to pay for dealing with climate change by taxing Jeffrey Bezos, we're going to tax him 50%. Or 20%, or 2%.
It's a good idea.
Jeff Bezos will be out with a helicopter and some machine guns and a machete or two. So, look, let's focus on goals and see if we can agree on goals. Then we'll fuss about the policy once we've decided. The hard part is deciding what we want to do. What I can tell you is that in this district, I get virtually no pushback on the progressive ideals. I get virtually no pushback. So, for example, and I bump into Republicans all the time, and I just talk to people. And one of the things that no one disagrees with is legalizing cannabis. I cannot understand why the National Democratic Party doesn't just say,
I know.
Let's get on with this, please.
It's outrageous.
Let's just deal with this. And in the state of Kentucky, the shame is that we are so much in debt, our state is so much in debt, but we grow $1 billion worth of cannabis in Kentucky. We are one of 5 states that grows $1 billion worth of marijuana, and we're the only one where it's illegal. So we're spending money in the state to lock people up, to prosecute them, but it could be a source for tax revenue. It could be a way to help us dig out of our financial hole. In the state of Colorado, the year that they went, for full legalization, they sold almost $1 billion worth of pot. They got a tax benefit of $180 million, but the direct economic benefit to the state was $2.3 billion. That's just in year one. So anyway, those things don't get any argument. Things like we need rural hospitals to stay open. Of course we do. We need to pay working people more. We get into some issues with that because business owners say, well, that scares me. But I think there's a way that we can move forward with that. Healthcare, everybody understands it's too expensive. They get a little scared with the idea. Every once in a while, someone says socialism to me. But I'm the guy on the ground talking directly to them. The bigger issues remain guns and abortion. I asked a neighbor if they would vote for me. And they said, and these are people that would drop whatever they're doing to help me. If they were in the middle of doing something important to them, I said, hey, I really need your help. They would stop what they're doing to come help me. They're my neighbors. Yep. They like me. So I asked for their vote, and one of them said, well, you're anti-gun. And I said, not anti-gun. I just don't want to go into Kroger's and get shot. And they said, well, we don't want that either. And I said, and I don't want someone to get on a school bus, a kid with a weapon, deciding he's got to settle a score on a school bus or at a school. Well, we don't want that either. And I said, I don't want someone to show up at a hotel in Las Vegas with multiple automatic weapons and thousands of rounds and all sorts of stuff. And well, we don't want that either. So they start saying, well, like we do need some better background checks and better mental health. They know, but Democrats aren't willing yet to talk to them about it. And the issue of abortion remains a big one. But I tell people, look, I've been part of 3 pregnancies, and all of them came to term, including the one that our insurance company told us the only thing they would pay for was a termination. That was because our daughter had some birth defects that were serious. We didn't know how serious, but she lived. She's 27 years old now. So I can say every baby that I've been part of has come to term. That said, you want to make it about choice. We need to make this choice to choose to have a baby a lot easier. We can do that by paying people more money, by having a functioning medical system, by having a functioning preschool and child care system. Richard Nixon, by the way, was one pen stroke away from setting us up with a national preschool system. And he got talked out of it by Pat Buchanan, conservative ideologue.
Yep.
So anyway, I think most of the people I talk to don't really have a problem with this, especially when you talk to them one-on-one and show them that you're willing to listen.
Mm-hmm.
They get it. They don't have rural broadband. I'm hearing from families who have to put their kid in the pickup truck and drive over to McDonald's where there's free Wi-Fi so their kid can attend school. It's ridiculous. By the way, a great idea came from our campaign. Rich, the bass player from the band America, said we should use the post office to do rural broadband. And he said, I've looked into the founding of the post office, and it was founded to improve communication and connection across the states. It's kind of perfect. They need some modernization. And with the post office in charge, they'd have the power of the federal government to be able to say to a landowner, look, we're coming Tuesday. We're going to dig a trench. We're going to bury some stuff. We'll cover it up. You'll never know. Right? When the state of Kentucky tried to do stuff like that, when we had Governor Steve Beshear, we ran into all sorts of obstacles from property owners who didn't want it to happen. They started suing, and all kinds of money got spent and wasted. But the federal government should do this. It should be a federal program. I'm a little distressed that Joe Biden's plan for rural broadband mentions private companies, encouraging them to do it. They've been encouraged for a long, long time. They've had their opportunity. Yeah. Let's make this a national program, and they can pay a little bit of money to use access. Let's make the post office an ISP. And for areas that are not being fairly covered, the post office can just go in and take over. So
that's a great idea. I actually love that idea too. And
isn't that a great one?
Yeah, it is. Something that you said that piqued my interest is that a lot of your constituency that you run into, one of the issues they have is guns, and that right. Is something that I've been struggling with lately. As my own political thought has evolved massively on the subject over just the last 5 years. I've gone from someone who 5 years ago or so would have said, I don't believe anyone should have the right to own a gun. Honestly, that was my opinion. These are weapons of killing, death. Then again, I understand a lot of arguments for gun ownership, especially in rural areas. I think there's a difference between gun ownership in inner city or urban areas and rural areas. Like you said, like in Las Vegas, where we saw the massacre of the concert. That's a different situation than if you're out in the middle of Kentucky and you're trying to hunt or whatever, right? Another thing that is changed my perspective is, speaking of Kentucky, we recently saw the Breonna Taylor decision. If I was a person of color in Louisville, I would probably want to arm myself, just knowing the threat I'm up against from my own law enforcement. So I do understand the arguments for gun ownership, and also I also understand that it does drive so many people away from the left, so many rural people, so many people that feel that guns are a big part of their identity and a big part of their national pastime or hobby or whatever they justify it with. It's not my thing, but I certainly don't want to turn off people to the leftist cause just because of this one thing. What exactly is your plan on guns? Because for me, I've kind of come to the conclusion that I think they should be allowed, just not weapons of war. No AKs, no high capacity magazines, but other than that, I think people should have a robust Second Amendment. Where are you falling on that?
Well, first of all, I see the Second Amendment as it's written to be in conflict with the preamble to the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's, by the way, assume that when they said men, really they meant women as well, and all people, but even though they didn't back then. Anyway, the idea that we have rights given to us by God, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but I'm in a movie theater and someone pulls out a gun, they're fully within their Second Amendment rights, and they don't break the law until they shoot me. I think that's a conflict of rights that could be discussed that way. However, guns are a reality in rural America. What would it look like to actually remove guns from rural America? Tell me how you would do that. There's just no way. You know, I think you'd have an easier time taking everyone's car away. You know,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen. On the other hand, we have 40,000 people die.
I know. Yeah.
From,
It's crazy.
It's crazy. And 2/3 of those are from accident and suicide. So the first thing we need to do is study. Treat this as a medical problem, a healthcare problem. Find out everything you can about every gun-related death. Obviously, we need better mental health care in the United States, but you know, those who are gun rights activists will say, well, yes, you'd have to have some sort of mental test to get a gun, maybe. No, that's not sufficient. We need better mental health care for everybody in the country, not just use it as a decision for whether you get a gun.
Agreed.
You know, I live in Falls of Rough, Kentucky. I'm on a chip and seal road. When I step outside at night, I can see every star in the sky as long as it's a clear night.
Lucky.
My neighbors are armed to the teeth. And if someone breaks into my place, whether I'm home or not, it's going to be my neighbors that come to my rescue. The police are every bit of 30 minutes at least away if they will come. So I hope that gets the idea. We've got to get a discussion going, though.
Yeah.
I think it's less about the actual guns. I hear what you're saying about the military-style weapons, but you get into trouble when you try to define them. One hunter said to me, I've got a hunting rifle that can shoot a lot further and, you know, send a projectile at a higher velocity than an AR.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's another thing for me at least, is as someone who's not a gun owner, I also feel like I am admittedly very ignorant on the subject. So I don't want to be telling people what they can and can't be doing to defend themselves as someone who is admittedly ignorant on the subject. So, and that's another huge thing that the left runs into, is that most people that are advocating for, you know, taking the guns and stuff are quick to be pointed out they're not actually very knowledgeable on the subject by, you know, their right-wing counterparts, and that quickly just dismantles the entire subject. They start laughing at us, right? So it's just one of those complex subjects where it's like there does need to be a balance stricken between, you know, making sure that these people don't feel too threatened by the left. You know, when like Beto says, I'm going to come take your fucking guns or whatever, like, I just think that's so, it doesn't, you know, help build a coalition for what we're looking towards. And yeah, I totally agree that we need, you know, gun control. I think that it should be just as rigorous, if not more, to get a gun than you can to get your driver's license. Stuff like that should be, you know, very simple and very logical. You know, it's not going to happen because, you know, the corrupting influence of the NRA. And of course, that goes back to the whole problem with campaign finance and the corruption in Washington. The NRA, much like any of these other lobbyist groups, is paying for, you know, a lack of action. And that's resulting in the continued gun violence we see, especially, like I said, in, you know, cities, but also, you know, we saw that church in Texas shot up. So it's all over the country. It's definitely an epidemic, like you said. It's just one of those very tough matters to address politically because so many people feel so passionately about it. And of course, abortion is like that too, although I feel that there's even less, you know, room to budge on that. I do feel like that is a fundamental right that can't be, you know, altered in any way. I don't think that attacking a woman's right to choose has any, you know, validity whatsoever. So obviously, I'm sure you're 100% pro-choice. Is that one of the things that you run into?
I'm 100%. I think it is pro-choice is certainly important, but I also want to tell you, I don't know that any of us can say when life begins, and I say that to folks. There are folks on the other side of the discussion that say life begins at conception. Having had babies, I love babies, and if I go into a room and there's a baby there, I'm going to try and get my time with the baby. Can I hold the baby, even if I don't even know the parents?
Yeah.
And I'm one of those dads that could take care of a baby virtually indefinitely. As long as I had all my materials, all my supplies, I could take care of a baby day and day, you know, just endlessly. And it's very, very difficult work, but I can do it. I think that we're going to have discussions. And in fact, one of the things I am aiming to do next year if I can find someone who can help do it, would be to do a public forum on abortion somewhere in rural Kentucky, ideally in the 2nd District. And the goal of this discussion wouldn't be to change any minds. It would be to get everyone involved, and we'd videotape everything, and everyone would have to agree to a code of behavior: no insults, no threats, no disruptions, no intentional lies, et cetera, et cetera. But the first thing we would say is, we're not here to change any minds. No minds are going to be changed. What's going to happen is we're going to listen to each other. We're going to tell our stories. We're going to tell our standpoints and get to the point where, whether we agree or not, we at least understand what the other person or the other side or the other viewpoint is.
Yeah.
And then we can look for things that we have in common. For example, if we pay, I think I've said this, if we pay people more money, if working people were getting paid, we're asking for $15 an hour. Actually, if we were comparing it to 1977, minimum wage should be about $22 an hour. If people who work were getting paid enough money, I mean, right now a mom who works at McDonald's might get $9 an hour and she's already got one child and now she's pregnant again. She can't afford the first child. If she's only making, $18,000, $20,000 a year, she can't afford it. So we have to make those decisions much, much easier. It's so, healthcare, you're on your own. If you can't afford healthcare, the message from the industry is go ahead and die. You can't pay, just die. If we had support for working parents who, when they have to go back to work, they have a place that they could drop their child off that was government funded, like our public schools. Yeah. These are ways we can make it easier for people to choose to have babies. So I get a little squeamish about the idea of using abortion as birth control. I think there are so many other ways of birth control that I'd want to discourage that use. But ultimately, even a Republican man said to me once, we should probably just have a national vote and only women be allowed to vote on how we handle this.
That
was a Republican man who said that to me.
That is very accurate. Well, Hank, I know we've been going on for a little bit. One last thing I wanted to talk to you about before I let you go is you had a really excellent agriculture farming aspect of your website. And, big agriculture, big corporatized agriculture, it's one of those real threats to, the American dream, in my opinion, because if you're a farmer, if you're, a part of a lineage of farmers or want to continue that tradition, it's increasingly tough because obviously we have, you're competing with these massive, often government subsidized, big ag, and this brings with it a host of problems, right? We have factory farming, which is a horror in and of itself. We have the exploitation of workers abroad and as well as here, both documented and undocumented, right? This is something that's not being talked enough about because people just take it for granted. Obviously, everyone has to eat, but there are serious policies that can address these issues. And I really thought that your platform did a great job of doing just that. I wanted to pull it up on screen here. I'll share my screen in a sec. Okay. But yeah, I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about those farming policies, what you want to do to help kind of bring back in the agrarian community into the Democratic Party, and how you would, really plan on addressing those needs.
I didn't grow up on a farm, and I haven't really spent much of any time on a farm. There's millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people probably who know more about farming than I do. But what little I know that farmers are getting screwed. They are not they are not being taken care of. And we have been mistreating farmers for probably 120, maybe 140 years. In fact, it was farmers in the 1890s who started the whole idea of populism. Anyway, these ideas that we have came up from multiple discussions that I had with farmers. And so they suggested a nonprofit disaster insurance company so that that would be run by the government, nonprofit, to protect farmers, small farmers, family farmers, subsistence farmers, co-op farmers from the weather, so that when they have a full-on disaster, they've got insurance that could cover that, and nonprofit insurance. We talked about a nonprofit credit bureau so that they could buy their farms, so they could buy expensive farm machinery and be able to finance it. We talked about finding ways to choose products that would be encouraged for small farms to produce. So we would put price supports in for certain products. And we would also look for ways to encourage local consumption of food. I even think, if you live in the city, and by city I mean, Owensboro, Bowling Green, In other words, you've got a lawn somewhere. I think if you grow vegetables and you feed your family with it, I think you're entitled to a little bit of a break on your property tax. But that's how much we should be encouraging local production and consumption of food. That's one of the things that we will need to do if we're going to stop the damage we've done to the climate by shipping raspberries from Chile in February on, they're wrapped in single-use plastic clamshells and they're shipped on a massive boat burning petroleum. We're going to have to get past some of this. We'll be healthier if we eat locally produced food as well. So that is a huge key to moving forward in rural Kentucky and in rural America.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a great suggestion. And I also really enjoyed on your website the nope to ban plastics.
I'm wearing a nope button. I don't know if you can
Wonderful.
see. Let's see. Oh, it's on this side. Okay. My monitor is backwards. So nope stands for no plastics in my environment. And this happened. I was on an airplane and I asked for a cup of coffee and they brought back the paper cup, but it had a plastic cap and a little red plastic spear. And this cup of coffee had moved 20 feet from the place where the flight attendant poured it and then got the cup, and then it was going to be thrown away. And I thought, well, how can I say to them, please don't use any plastic? The person has another 100 people to take care of. So I'm causing problems. So we came up with the idea of the button. And by the way, any group that wants to use the artwork, just feel free to start using it as long as you're supporting the basic idea of discouraging single-use plastics. No plastics in my environment. I wear it to remind myself not to buy the jug of milk, but to buy the carton of milk. And I avoid single-use plastics wherever I can. I reuse. When I buy a loaf of bread that comes in a plastic bag, when the loaf of bread is gone, I kind of shake it out and put it aside and I use it for something else. I use it to freeze something in. So I reuse plastic bags. And if we start to make those efforts, we will apply pressure. Oh, the big one, everybody. Please stop drinking water out of plastic bottles. Just doing that would make a massive, massive difference. I have one time in the last 2 years, and it was because I was absolutely parched and didn't have any other alternative. One time given in. But I buy, if I'm drinking beer or sodas, or everything I get is either in glass or aluminum. They are actually recyclable. So I think that's a very important thing. And by the way, I got lots of buttons. If you run into me, I've probably got some with me.
And something that I think would be a great solution to that is hopefully if states like Kentucky, Tennessee, if they can start producing and growing hemp on massive levels, we can replace a lot of those plastics and even paper with hemp, which can be grown here. So I'm sure that's something you would be in support
Absolutely.
of as well.
I think there are potential dangers when you have something that's biologically based that you're going to use into a packing material. The amount of packaging that gets used. For example, they have cornstarch now for certain packaging, and you can throw it on your lawn and water it and it will come apart. But we need to know what the actual effects are going to be of tons and tons of new biological waste that was
True.
Single use. We need to understand really what are the repercussions if that stuff winds up in the ocean.
True.
So
specifically for paper, though, I think pretty much everything that's made out of paper could be made out of domestically grown and produced hemp, and that would be that would stop a lot of deforestation and stuff. Not to get on that side tangent. Anyway, great policies on this website. That's Hank for KY. Is there anywhere else people can learn more about your campaign or maybe follow you on socials?
Yeah, they should look for the best place, the most action. And I realize Facebook is for old people. I realize now that I'm old. I'm 17 in my head. But and as you get older, you'll understand that. But anyway, we're on Facebook and my personal page. I go live on Facebook now 7 days a week, beginning at 3:30 Eastern, the half hour before Andy Bashir, 2:30 Central. And we do a virtual fundraiser every weekend, and we're getting all kinds of musicians being part of it. We're going to have one of the Eagles call in on this weekend, I believe. I spoke with him, and theoretically he's going to talk with us. We've had members of the Doobie Brothers show up. We've had Governor Bashir showed up. Not Governor Bashir, sorry. Congressman John Yarmouth showed up. Dewey Bunnell from America, various candidates. So that's a great way to get in touch, and it's a great way to get involved in the conversation, because we look at comments all the time and people get real involved with it. So yeah, see you on, check out the Facebook Live.
Cool. Well, yeah, if anyone is watching this, I obviously urge you to check out Hank's website to read more about his great policies and to donate to, hopefully get Hank into the House of Representatives, where these ideas certainly absolutely belong, especially in a state like Kentucky. I mean, hopefully we can, kind of have not just a blue wave, but a real kind of populist uprising like you've referenced. Hopefully some people can realize that these kind of policies can be enacted, indeed, even in states like Kentucky, and the representatives can bring those ideas to places like the United States Congress. So thanks so much for joining me today, Hank. Really enjoyed talking to you and really appreciate what you're doing.
Likewise, Gavin. Thank you so much, and I appreciate the work you're doing. This is how you make a difference, and so
absolutely.
Hats off, congratulations, and thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hank.
Alrighty.
If anyone's still watching, make sure to subscribe to this video, give it a like, comment below, and check out the website for Hank Linderman. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and thank you, Hank.